Welcome to the introduction to the interdisciplinary literacy practices that are a part of the Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing. This will be a series of 10 more videos that will help clarify and provide educators resources to understand and to teach and use the interdisciplinary literacy practices. Today's video will be just a short introduction to them to help you understand the intent of the practices and where they play an important part in the reading and writing standards for all content areas. Our learning goal for this session is to help build a shared understanding of the purpose and function of these 10 interdisciplinary literacy practices. Understanding the purpose and function is so important, especially as English language arts teachers share these practices with content area teachers. The standards themselves place equal emphasis on the sophistication of what students read and the skills with which they read. So the intent of these practices are to balance that building of knowledge, which will take place in all classrooms across the state of Kentucky, but how you apply skills and strategies to comprehend that. So when we're talking about the literacy practices, it's not just for reading and writing in English language arts. It's all across the board, and in implementing these and providing them as a part of the standards, current research and best practice was used. And that current research and best practice suggests that students comprehend text best when they're able to activate schema, make meaning, and recognize vocabulary. Well, there's been a little bit of misinformation and a little bit of clarification needed on what we're talking about, especially at the middle and high school level when we're talking about activating schema. That's not normally a term unless you've been in a psychology class maybe, or especially with K-5 teachers, activating the schema is a big part of teaching kids to read. So when we're talking about activating schema, it's basically the same thing as activating prior knowledge, being very intentional about it, not assuming students know where the new content fits in their learning, but activating it specifically and very diligently. The next big part when we talk about balancing knowledge and application of skills and strategies is making sure that we expose students to multiple text and interdisciplinary content so that we provide those opportunities to build knowledge in meaningful ways. One of the important things, and as classroom teachers, myself and you, we deal with this daily, is that transference and application. What I use and learn in social studies class, I can't use in English language arts and vice versa, those kinds of things. So by identifying 10 specific research-based proven practices, literacy practices that can be used across the board in all content areas, we're hoping to help with that transference and application so that students are encouraged to read about their interests and curiosities in whatever content class they're in, but they see that the skills they need to read and understand transfer into all of our content areas. And the next step to that is writing about what you learn. And our on-demand writing, that's probably my number one request from districts and schools, is how do we help students understand how to write about what they're reading? So the literacy practices that are in our standards now are intended to address that, because we're giving written responses to text that has been read in every content area. So we're looking at how they can further knowledge by writing about what they are reading and their existing understanding of terms, concepts, and processes in whatever subject area that happens to be. So, and as we begin to look at these practices a little more closely, there are questions to consider. We have three. You see them on the screen. What is the purpose and function of the practices? How are they different from the reading and writing content standards? Because these are not standards, they're practices. But one of the things that I think is the most important is this third question. How does intentional engagement in these practices help to foster literacy and student learning, again, in all content areas? So the goal of this introduction, and as we continue the video series we're starting with middle and high school, 10 videos where we address each of the 10 literacy practices and what that looks like in the classroom, is to build that shared knowledge of the literacy practices and support thinking for our students. So let's do this. Let's start by, this is a slide that was actually provided by KDE in their trainings that they conducted last summer to clarify the difference in the standards versus the literacy practices. Now, our reading and writing content standards, those represent the goals or outcomes. They're vertically aligned, and they're expected outcomes for all students. They establish that statewide baseline of what we want students to know and be able to do at the conclusion of a grade or a grade span, and it's the minimum content. That's what we have to remember. This is the minimum of what we want kids to know and be able to do. They address what is to be learned, but, and as you notice in bold, they do not address how learning experiences are to be designed or what resources should be used. That is the professionalism of the teacher. That's where the teacher knows their students, they know the needs, they know the content, but they know the needs of how their kids will need to learn. What are the ups and downs that maybe you've experienced with other students? But to me, that's the job of the teacher. It's not taking away that autonomy of choosing strategies and ways to help kids learn what you're trying to teach. Now, when we move over to the interdisciplinary literacy practices, again, they are not standards, but they're built upon a foundation of common understandings or practices which provide the overarching goals for literacy instruction. They're fundamental to fostering that literacy-rich environment that goes beyond teaching just isolated skills, and they focus on that larger vision and objective of empowering independent lifelong learners who think deeply and critically about text. Now I'm going to take you back for just a second to writing. The only way that students can show us if they think deeply or critically about text is through the written response. So we have to back up. We have to teach we have to have that balance of knowledge and skills in order to move them to the written word. That is the intent of these practices. There are 10 chosen. There are many, many more than what we're looking at right now. But these are 10 that I like to say you get the most bang for your buck. These are the practices that foster that kind of learning in students. The information found in this introduction is very short, but there's more information in the actual standards document. It's in the very beginning of the standards document, and you can get a lot more information about the relationship between the standards and the 10 literacy practices. When we're talking about other content areas, they are sometimes very specific. For example, science has very specific literacy practices for a specific standard. These 10 are interchangeable in all content areas. So it's very important to understand that we're not saying literacy practice number 1 is aligned to standard number 2 or 3 or whatever. It's across the board, all standards. So when we're saying, I'm just kind of recapping and reinforcing here about these are not additional standards. The mathematical practices are a part of the standards. The 10 literacy practices are not. Instead, if utilized, these practices provide intentional opportunities for our students to practice the behaviors of a literate citizen, because it doesn't matter whether it's college or career, there is reading and writing taking place. So when we're talking about literacy practices, it's just not learning to read. It's all about learning how to operate as a literate citizen through the literacy, reading, and writing skills we all need. Now, because they are the overarching goals for creating a literacy rich environment, they're not attached to specific standards, as I mentioned earlier. Multiple literacy practices are engaged in the application and mastery of each reading and writing standard. So this is where the teacher professionalism, again, comes into play in choosing which of these best fit what instruction they're doing at the time. The practices all support the Kentucky Board of Education's vision, which is to ensure each and every Kentucky student is empowered and equipped with the academic, cognitive, metacognitive, technical, and most importantly, employable skills. Again, these practices are about reading and writing in any subject area. They go beyond just teaching and learning isolated skills, and they focus on that larger vision and objective of empowering those independent, lifelong learners. As you can see on this slide, the 10 interdisciplinary literacy practices are clarified further within the actual standards document by including some possible teacher actions and possible student actions. As you can see on the screen there, those are found on pages 384 through 390 of the actual document. For example, you are looking at interdisciplinary literacy practice number 1. Recognize that text is anything that communicates a message. And as a classroom teacher, that is not a strategy. That is a practice. The strategy, the teacher chooses the strategy of how a student will address this practice. How will you help your students? Well, we look down in the box. There's a possible teacher action on the left side about intentionally choosing print and non-print text to demonstrate a variety of ways. And then on the right side, some possible student actions may be what you're seeing there about author's perspective, intended meaning. And in our trainings this past summer, we actually went farther. What we did was share this information, and then what would that actually look like in the classroom? If I am a sixth grade teacher and I'm wanting to ensure that the literacy practice of recognizing that text is anything that communicates a message, what strategy might I use to do that? And teachers were able to talk together and able to share with each other. Well, our intent in the follow-up videos that will take place is to give you that in action by some teachers that will be joining me who have tried some of these in their classrooms. So those will be coming up. This is the quick introduction and where you can find what you need right now, but we will be following up. It's like adding one more box. Here's possible teacher actions, here's possible student actions, and then here are possible strategies that I have used or someone else has used to address this particular literacy practice. Also, for getting more background information, what you're seeing in this cog around the outside are all 10 literacy practices listed. We just looked at number 1, recognize that text is anything that communicates a message. Number 2, employ, develop, and refine schema to understand and create text, and so on and so on. But that is just a visual to show you how these fit into any content area. You also see a link to a video that the Kentucky Department of Education has released that will help give you a little more information if you're interested in getting additional support and additional clarification before the other videos are ready to come out, which should be by the first of the year. And that brings us to the coming soon. I've talked about them all the way through. We will do resource videos for each of the 10 practices and strategies that model the use of them in the classroom. And once the 6 through 12 videos are completed, then the work we will begin on for K-5. So be looking for those, and you can contact me at any time. My information is on the first slide. In closing, you see on the slide that the 10 interdisciplinary literacy practice videos for 612 will be coming very soon, and we hope that you visit again. I will release the information. If you have any questions, my contact information is on the first slide, or if you would like to be added to a distribution list that I currently have of teachers across the region and periodically send updates.